Good afternoon and welcome to the 2017 National Benchmarking Conference. We're so thrilled to see you all here today. And I have a few announcements and that type of thing, but I'm going to wait and do those after our keynote presentation. Our keynoter needs to get back to the airport, so we're going to delay all the regular announcements and changes and all of that kind of thing until afterwards. So it is my great pleasure to introduce JCCC's President, Joe Sopcich. Dr. Joe.
Thank you, Lou. And thank you for all that you've done to get this conference up and going. Most importantly, special thanks to all of you for being here on our campus and attending the Benchmark Institute, this conference that we're holding over the next couple days. I have to say that this is always one of the most enjoyable things that we do when we host this, because it brings all of these research and data-oriented people to our campus. And in today's world of higher education, what you all do today is becoming more greatly appreciated than ever before in the history of higher ed. It's kind of like, imagine a big sector of our economy of which there was no barometers of how it was doing or no measurements of how the progress that it made. What you do every day is that you ensure that we're able to see all the great things that we're doing on our campuses in a quantified format. So I want to thank you very, very much. I have the pleasure today of introducing Dr. Harper-Marinick. Maria spoke yesterday at our awards banquet and actually was the sole judge in awarding, I guess you could say, recognizing special achievement with our faculty, and did a remarkable job. But let me tell you a few things about Maria. She is the chancellor of the Maricopa Community College District, and of course that's in Arizona. She oversees about 200,000 students, about 204,000 students in 10 different campuses. So it's a monumental responsibility. She's a member of many local boards back in Phoenix and across the country. For example, the Greater Phoenix Leadership, the Greater Phoenix Economic Council, the Valley of the Sun United Way, the Greater Phoenix Chamber of Commerce, a variety of national boards, including the American Council on Education and Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities, and is an Aspen Institute Ascend Fellow. She's been the recipient of many awards and recognitions, such as the 2016 Athena Public Sector and the 2017 Valley Leadership Woman of the Year. Maria is a native of the Dominican Republic. She came to Arizona State University as a Fulbright Scholar in 1982. She holds a PhD in Educational Technology and a master's degree in Instructional Media from Arizona State University. It's one of those things where just recently I picked up a magazine on community colleges, and Maria was cited as one of the top 4 community college leaders in the country, one of those folks who's going to be in the spotlight and does a tremendous job for all of us in community colleges, but most importantly for the over 200,000 students that she serves. So Maria, thank you for being here today. We really appreciate your presence.
Thank you, Joe. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. I hope that I keep you up and at least energized after lunch. That's one of the things that most speakers don't like to be the people who speak after lunch. But I noticed that they served you protein and not pasta. I usually say pasta makes people go to sleep. So hopefully my voice doesn't do that either. But thank you to Lou and to the college for that invitation. So let me tell you what I intend to do, and I'm going to try to not move a whole lot for the benefit of the person who's taping it, and also because I realized there's a wooden platform, and every time I walk, my heels make a lot of noise. So it's hard for me to stay in one place, but I'm going to try to be good. So let me tell you what I plan to do, because I know who you are, I know what you do. You are people that do work that I've done myself in the past in my career. So my lens for the presentation is speaking to you not as someone who could be an institutional researcher or institutional effectiveness, but as a leader of an institution and how I perceive that we have changed how we tell the story about the Maricopa colleges through data. So it is going to be, and I have Kerry Mitchell here, who is also from Maricopa, so he'll get to tell you when I leave if what I told you was the truth or not. He's been around for a long time. So that's what I decided to do, that it may be helpful to you as you do your job to understand our perspective as those who are making decisions and who are dealing with the politics of our communities and our institutions. So that's the plan, and then I'm open to your questions when I get through that. So you heard, going too fast. You heard a little bit about the system from the introduction. How many of you are familiar with Maricopa colleges? A lot of you, thank you. So it is a system of 10 colleges. Our colleges are individually accredited by the Higher Learning Commission. Now, how many of you are in multi-college systems? Any of you? Some of you. So you know the difficulties, the challenges that come from having that kind of structure, because the colleges have a lot of autonomy and independence. And the colleges in the Maricopa system were created to be proud of that autonomy and independence. And actually, since 1962, when our district was established in Arizona revised statutes, the climate has been one of internal competition. So that matters in terms of how we have chosen to look at data and report data historically, and I'll get to a little bit more of that. As you heard, we serve collectively over 200,000 students. That's actually lower than at the peak of the recession, when many of us, our institutions, saw quite an increase in enrollment. At that point, it was 275,000 students. And that is a combination of credit and non-credit. And so I'm using this one because this is a fairly new chart that we use, just to illustrate in which ways we're beginning to be more transparent with the data. And understanding that, is that pointing? Yes, that people actually want to know specific things. So there was a time in the past when we used to say things like, we transfer most of the students that attend one of the 3 public institutions in Arizona, and that is Arizona State, Northern Arizona, and University of Arizona. Well, nowadays, people want to know what that is, and people want to know how many students that is in the context of how many students are actually attending those public institutions. But more importantly, the question I get is what? When if I say something to my board members, by the way, 7 elected board members, 24,000 students at Arizona State University in a given year have transfer credit from Maricopa. And then what question do you think today, in Maricopa today, not in the past, board members would ask? How are they doing? How are they doing? That's a very good question. Did they get a degree from Maricopa? Very good question. And also, if you have 200,000 students, how many of those are transfer students, and what is the proportion of students that said they came to Maricopa with the intent to transfer that actually transfer? Those are questions I get frequently. Those are not questions I ever got 5 years, 6 years, 10 years ago. So the expectation from governing board members, who are members of the community who get elected, have changed in how we are choosing to hold institutions accountable. And I'm going to guess that this is not unique to the Maricopa colleges. But this is the way that we choose now to present. So we talk about completion of degrees and certificates. We get that question, I get that question at least once a week. We want to talk about transfer because that's an important part of our mission. And by the way, about 50% of the students, 40% of the students, when depending on the year, when asked, why are you here? They say, we're here to eventually transfer. So that's why that's important. And then there is increasing questions about what is the return on investment, what is the economic impact of the colleges in the community. That those questions typically come from legislators and the governor and business people. So we are now getting into the habit of also including that kind of information. So that's what that is. And I'm not pointing. Oh, now I'm going too fast. What am I supposed to point? Here we go. Oh, here we go. So let me give you a little bit of who the students are to give you the context. I always believe that context is important to any conversation, especially a conversation about data. So you can see to the left is educational intent, and it's a little lower than what I told you about transfer. So let me tell you how we started asking initially at the enrollment process step. We were only asking about 3 questions of the students. 3 questions, and the potential responses were quite aggregated in a very broad manner. And then what happened when we started getting requests for accountability about achievement and completion? We couldn't report exactly whether or not, so let me just back up. So initially is the easier stuff. Not easy for community colleges, but easier is graduation rates and completion rates, and obviously you can count certificates and degrees and all of that. But we in community colleges have spent a lot of time and energy trying to convince all of the communities locally and nationally that what we do that matters greatly to students is not only about completion and graduation. So then they say, okay, so what is it about? And we say it's about the students achieving their goals. And then they'll say, so how do you know they did? And what we found out in the system is we couldn't respond to that question because the questions we were asking the students at the point of input were not detailed enough for us to then get the data, disaggregate, and match the data to that intent. So now we're doing that, and this is how we aggregate back up is transfer. You're here because it's job related. We have 17,000 students taking courses for dual enrollment, and they're counted as college students. But it was important for us to know of all the students that we report on, how many of those are actually in the high school taking dual enrollment. That's about 17,000, so that's why that became a category for our reporting. Then we have university student. That was another, we're not sure what that meant, but people love to say, well, there are all these students who go to Arizona State that come back to Maricopa to take physics, usually mathematics, chemistry, because our classes are smaller, because we have professors, we don't have TAs, and so on. There's thousands and thousands of them. So well, how do we know that if we are not in any way flagging those students and tracking them? So we decided that if that was a question that we needed to respond to, then it was really important that we were able to track those students. So we added that category, I'm a university student. And then we had personal interest. So before we had all of this, I'll tell you an anecdote about my own kid. We actually had personal interest, transfer, and workforce. So I have my son who's now 23, but at the time he was a sophomore in high school. He was going to take dual enrollment, so he had to register at the colleges. And I said, you need to go through that process so I can be a secret shopper. And then you tell me how well it went. Well, it didn't. So that's what people like me do, by the way. I'm always secret shopping something because I don't want to hear from the public what's not working. I need to see it. So my son was doing this thing, but my most critical question was, I wonder how he identified himself in the process of enrollment. So I said, John, did you complete? Yes, I did it. And said, did you get a question about why you're doing this? And he said, yes. And I think he was taking a math class. And I said, so what did you choose as the reason for enrolling? What do you think he said? There was university, transfer, workforce, and personal interest. He was a sophomore in high school. What do you think? Personal interest. And I was like, what the heck? I'm like, John, I said, you didn't think about, it's a university credit? And he said, I'm only a sophomore in high school. I'm not thinking about the university. And then I said, and maybe it's good for employment. He's like, I'm not looking for work. And I said, well, what were you thinking when you chose personal interest? And my son said, well, you told me it was good for me, didn't you? So I felt it was personal interest. So we decided that we needed to do better than allowing people like John to make a crazy decision like that. So we changed that. And then we are tracking carefully part-time, full-time. That may not be the same distribution for your institutions, but actually when I became a vice chancellor and we started looking at data back in 2005, it was 78% part-time, 78%. And we all know the correlation between attending part-time, full-time, and obviously persistence and completion. So we like to show how that is changing because it does matter. And then, of course, we need to track ethnicity, and we do that all the time. And we look at every possible way you can disaggregate the data by college, by semester. I drive people like Carrie crazy because I'm always asking for more. And then I get something like, you do know the more we disaggregate, the smaller the n gets, and then the data loses its meaning. And I'm extremely aware of that. I was a researcher myself, but guess what? Other people don't get that. So we need to disaggregate, and we need to show that we will be making decisions that are impacting students, even if the n becomes really small. We can't tell the governing board that they shouldn't know that information. So why that's important for us is because two ways that we use ethnicity. One is, are we matching the ethnicity of the population in the county that we serve? And we are actually matching in terms of Asian Pacific Islander, African American students, Native American students, but we are not matching the Latino proportion. So for Maricopa County, which is where we are, is about 31%. Ours is now 29, but it goes up by about 2 percentage points every year. It used to be, about 5 years ago, it was down to 24%. So that's not by accident. That is because we look at the data and we decide, okay, we know who the students are, why are they not coming, what are we going to do about it, and I'm going to get to that intentional decision making in a second. So that's why that's important. So we're now up to 29%. Okay, so I'm going to tell you now, maybe. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to now go to the honest part. Where is Lou? Is she here? Oh. That's the part where you send me the video before you put it out there. I told her I don't like to censor myself. But I'm going to be honest with you about where we were in 2005 and then what is the progression to where the institution is today in terms of data, because I believe we are doing a very good job today. Maybe not perfect yet, but much better. So I'm going to start with that. So back in 2005, we were reporting only when absolutely necessary. So once a year, it would go to our governing board, and it was a presentation that someone would make with like 250 PowerPoint slides, and probably the board members had no idea what they were looking at, and the data was presented at the highest possible level. And the reasons for that included something like, if we disaggregate by, well, I already told you, by ethnicity, the N is low. If we disaggregate by college, that's not fair to the colleges, because then people are going to compare the colleges, and we're not going to do that. If we disaggregate by whatever, nobody gets it, because they're not really researchers, So, in my opinion, what we did is, the more the better, to get people confused, so that they don't, that. I'm not telling you something you probably haven't done yourselves. So this notion of the reason why we need to know is because we should be making decisions to bring a change to the institution for the benefit of the students. That's the value of data. So way back then, the term that was used was developing a culture of evidence. So we started having those conversations, and I still remember two of my colleagues that were college presidents when I said, have we ever looked at persistence from fall to fall? It was horrible. were you then? Were you there? You were, because you've been there for a long time. Let me tell you what it was, because it was 35% retention, fall to fall. And they're like, no, we haven't looked at that. And then I said, well, I am going to look at that because I'm a researcher and I need to be true to my profession, right? So I started showing that, and I really thought I was going to get fired because people were saying, where is she going to go with this? And what are you talking about? We're community colleges, and we have students from all kinds of backgrounds. Life happens. And I said, well, but if they are not coming back, they're not going to be successful in achieving their goals. And I remember one person said to me, we don't know what your obsession is with student success, because we are cafeteria colleges, and we just offer stuff, and people take what they need, and some people go and some people go. So I started using examples for illustration. So I would say it's a room like this, and I said there's 100 of us right here. So we come back a year from now, and only 35 of us are in this room. Is that good? It may be good. Do we know what happened? Life happens. I don't believe life happened to 65 people. Maybe to some people, but I don't know that life happened to every single person, because we need to be reflective about what are we doing or not doing to help more people on those 65 to stay and complete their goals. So that was the beginning of the culture of evidence. Then in about 2007, we had we've had actually a student success conference for 30 years or something now. But interestingly enough, it was only for student affairs people. And faculty, not only the faculty were not invited, were not welcomed. And I was like, but this is really interesting. It's a student success conference, and the people who are actually dealing with the students most of the time are not included to be part of the conversation. No, this is about student affairs. And I said, well, it isn't, because student success is everyone's business. So we had this big conference, and the keynote speaker was Kay McClenny. How many of you know who Kay McClenny is? A lot of you. I hope all of you. So Kay McClenny was speaking, and right before she took the stage, we had a vice chancellor spoke, the chancellor at the time spoke, and the director of student development spoke. And I believe all of them said that here we are in Maricopa, we are the largest community college in the nation, and we are one of the best community colleges in the nation. Everybody said that, and we believed it. And then Kay McClenny came on stage and said, I just heard at least 3 of you take claim to 2 things. One is you're the largest, which, by the way, we argue over that with Miami-Dade and Los Angeles. So last week at AACC, actually, Eduardo Padron from Miami-Dade, Francisco Rodriguez from LA, and Maria-Harper-Marinick from Maricopa presented together, and we all had our enrollment data, so I thought that was, it wasn't about that, but it was interesting to see what we all chose to share about. And then she said, but you also claimed that you are one of the best. And what was the question that you think we got back from Kay McClenny? How do you know? How do you know? Show me the data. And guess what? We couldn't. We couldn't, because we were not looking at the data in the manner that would yield the response to that, I believe, critical question. So we decided that we needed to have focus on student success, and we started a student success initiative. Now, it is Maricopa, and it is 10 colleges that are autonomous. So to come up with ideas and to use the data to inform the conversation, that was not hard. We love council committees, ad hoc task forces, and we love to meet, and everything takes a long time, and that's just the way it is. So we did all of that, and it wasn't lack of ideas. We had lots and lots of flip chart papers filled to capacity, many, many, many of those. It took us 5 years to implement. 5 years, because that's what happens when you are in a very large system. But nevertheless, student success became part of the lingo, and then because people like Kay McClenny were asking those kinds of questions, it actually forced us to look at the data in a different way. Then everybody embraced the completion agenda. That started with the coalition of ACCT, AAEC, Achieving the Dream, League for Innovation. I know there were five of us. And all of a sudden is we need to make completion the agenda. How many of you have a completion agenda going on at the colleges? Yes. So what happened in our place, we had board members went to ACCT, that's the Association of Community College Trustees. They went to the national conference, they call it the Congress. And every presentation was about this, and papers were signed, and people went on stage making a big deal. So they came back and said, we will do that too. And the next thing you knew, there was a resolution adopted by our governing board that matched what the groups were proposing, and that is that by 2020, we would increase the number of completers basically by 50%. So our governing board passed the resolution. So immediately we had to go to action in terms of data collection because we need to find a way to collect and report. And the time for, this is what happened, how do we define this and how are they defining it? And should we be part of the voluntary framework for accountability? Should we stay with CCBP? You know, is my definition better than your definition? Well, it doesn't matter what your definition is. We're going to have to report to the governing board, so come up with something that makes sense, and let's start collecting and reporting in the appropriate manner. So governing board actions in my system tend to lead to a change in behavior in how we conduct the business. I'm sure that happens at your places too. So many times we don't like it when the governing board sets that direction, but actually it does help, because it gives us a sense of what is expected of us, and then we don't have, that's not the kind of point that you argue with your governing board, right? So they adopted the resolution, and I'm gonna show you where we are. At the same time, we had some governing board members also went to ACCT and learned about policy governance and the Carver model, and then they decided that we needed to take a different look at all of our governing board outcomes, which is part of the governance model. So they engaged in conversations for a full year, coming up with new statements for what they call governing board outcomes. Now, I don't need to tell you that I was intimately involved in that process and conversations, because my fear was that here's a consultant leading the governing board in a certain direction, and maybe that direction at the end of the day would make it impossible for us to actually collect, analyze, and report data that would advance the outcomes. So we had to be really involved, and every time be thinking about, what does that mean? What kind of metric is that? How are we going to do that? How does that look like? What kind of reporting is that? So we were involved in that. Then they ended up with 4 categories of outcomes, and they are totally aligned with our mission. So one category is transfer, one is workforce development, another one is developmental education, because 60% of our students need some form of remediation or developmental ed. And then the last one that I call the catch-all category is because there were things like civic engagement, global engagement, community development, continuing education that didn't quite fit in 1, 2, or 3. So there's a 4th category that has like 5 things in there because there was no other place to go, and they didn't want to have more than 4 categories. So that's what happens. Then we decided that for each of those, we had to identify metrics. So we ended up with how many metrics? Like 80, 100 or something. So we identified about 80, I think there were maybe a few more at the very beginning, metrics that we would track every single year and report to our governing board every November. We do that. And the trick between the person reporting and those preparing the report is they always think that they need to know every single piece of information that went into the outcome report. And I tell them, actually, no. So I had a person that used to be Carrie's boss, Sherry, and she used to argue with me and say, we're going to give them 15 pages of methodology, and they need to know. And I said, nobody's questioning your integrity as a researcher, because if we were questioning it, you would get fired. So just because you feel compelled to explain everything that goes into the calculation doesn't mean that they actually care. So the struggle became, how do we report something that is not so technical that it loses its meaning to the governing board, and yet detailed enough, because some of them do believe that they have the capacity to understand data at a higher level than we give them credit for. So we had to find a way to balance they don't need to know all of that. So I would send the PowerPoint slides back, because they would have the graph, and then to the side there would be like, I don't know what you call them, like dialogue boxes. And there would be like methodology, and it would be like a bubble, like this is higher than that. And I'm like, I can actually see that without that bubble in there, so get that out of there. And by the way, make the graph bigger. You give me stuff where the lines are so thin that we can't see anything. So then I personally would spend my weekend, unbeknownst to Sherry, deleting all the dialog boxes and actually going into the graph and making the lines thick and colorful and big, something that you put up and immediately you convey the message, and you don't need to read the dialog boxes, and you don't need to read the 25-page, methodology guide that I allow them to include as an appendix, just so they could sleep at night. So the governing board metrics did matter, because it impacted actually a lot of the questions that we were asking and responding to with data. And then I'm going to end today with where we are today and how all of this work influenced how we have chosen to move forward with our strategic plan, brand new, just adopted, beginning to implement this year. And so I'm going to share a little bit of that with you. So here we go. So here's the board resolution. So I'm going to give you some examples of how we have transitioned to provide data from the days when we had all these very high-level slides, just to show you, illustrate what matters to our board and the kinds of things that make sense, in case that is helpful to you. So that's the resolution, increased by 50%, which, by the way, some of them thought that it said increase to 50%. And when we started reporting, they're like, well, that's not good enough. I'm like, I don't know what's good enough, but that's what you adopted. And if you change the word by to the word to, you're totally changing the meaning of that sentence. So there's still some of them saying, we made a mistake. And I say, well, you wrote your resolution and you adopted it, and we just work around it. But it says by, not to. But here's where we are. So, oops, sorry. Okay, this is, what am I supposed to be pointing? Oh, there we go. So this is what we share with them. This is very simple, but they get it because it's very visual. Is the blue is tracking where we are, and then we have the where we need to be, and basically in a 2 seconds they can see that we are kind of on target and that we are going to reach the goal, and that's why they now say it should be to 50%, because they almost, instead of some sort of acknowledgement that a lot of work is going on to make that happen, is happening too easily, and maybe we need to up the game. And maybe they're right in doing that. But for now, this is an example of what we give them. Okay. So this one is something that we would have never done before. And that is an acknowledgement of how many people in the system are not achieving their goals. This is part of the new transparency and accountability. So we have who received an award, and then who transferred without an award, and I'm going to tell you why that's happening, who's still enrolled, and so on. You can see that. And then we have a gigantic 40% that have not achieved their goals. They are expecting to see it. We're obligated to share. And if we are uncomfortable with the data, we better have an explanation of why that's the case, and more importantly, what are we doing to change that? Let me talk a little bit about transferred without an award. So this is how this stuff happens. Remember how I told you the majority of the students come with the intent to transfer. So their goal is not a degree from the Maricopa colleges. Their goal is a degree from, let's say, Arizona State University. So the students complete all of the requirements, and they simply transfer. And we have great agreements with the university. All of the credits are typically applicable to a degree. So what's the only thing that they don't do is they do not complete a request for graduation. And I don't know, I think we removed the fee. It used to be $15, and then someone would say, well, it's $15. Well, get the $15 out of the way. They're still not completing it. So one of the things that I would like to do, hopefully this year, is automatic award of degrees. Who does that in this room? Some of you. And I know all of the philosophical arguments. Usually is academic side saying, let's do it, and then you have the student affairs side saying you're taking the responsibility away from the student. But at the end of the day, we need to have a better representation of the work that we're doing. Why does it matter? Because it's not only the governing board is tracking that, we have legislators tracking that, and we have people like the governor in Arizona tracking that. So we want to tell the story a little differently. So what I'm hoping we do is an opt-out version of this, so that when you enroll, you're automatically agreeing to get your degree. And I know it impacts financial aid too, so that's a whole separate conversation. So we need to do it responsibly, but I believe that's our obligation, is to help the students complete. Not unusual when someone has a collection of credits. I have a young male who knows me well and came to see me, used to work for us, and said, I am really upset because I completed, I know he had something like 90 credits. And part of that was the what we call the AGEC, which is the Arizona General Education Curriculum. It's a core of 35, 37 credits that transfers as a block. So it's very important, but it's not a degree. So he thought, because he got an AGEC, somehow that was a degree. And when he went to get a job, they said, you don't have a college degree. And he came back and said, how can I not have a college degree? I completed 90 credits and the AGEC. And I say, I have news for you. All you have is a high school degree. Why? Because you haven't gone to any place to bundle your 90 credits and make them count towards a degree. And the AGEC is not a degree. It may be a certificate, but that's not going to get you a job. That's going to help you transfer. So for all people like him and other people, and for us, for our data, that's something that I would like to do. We've also implemented reverse transfer. How many of you have reverse transfer? Yay! I think that's the best thing that we can do for our students. We have implemented with all of the public universities and 2 privates in Arizona. And I believe we implemented now for 2 years, and we already have hundreds of students completing, primarily through Arizona State, which is where we have the best. So all of you know what reverse transfer is, right? You don't. So you move to the university, and let's say you've completed, I don't know, 60 credits with the community colleges, so you're short, in our case, 4. You go to the university, and when you complete courses that would fit into our degrees, just as we transfer credits from Maricopa to ASU, we'll take the ASU credit, transfer back to Maricopa, count towards a degree, and award you an associate's degree. So it is something that has begun to get traction, I would say, in the last 2-3 years. Not easy or inexpensive to implement, because you need the willingness of all of the partners to do that. But once you put it in place, it does matter, and it matters to the students. I'm going to tell you a group of students that I keep in mind is engineering students. Because a lot of the students who go to the community colleges, they need to transfer sooner than an associate, because they have a lot of the major courses embedded a little earlier than perhaps they should, but they do. So it helps those students that otherwise would be left out. Let's say life doesn't work at Arizona State. Now you have a bunch of credits and you don't have any certification connected to that. So that's what that is important. But this is just an example of the kinds of data that we're now showing that in the past we wouldn't. And then I'm gonna get to the ethnicity part, because this is also important, because that was one that we argued for years about, well, the N, and well, it doesn't matter, the students are there and we need to report. So data like, and this is just something I took from a report, so it has lost all its labels, but just so that you know what this is, it's just the fall to fall of our students by ethnicity. So every single question that we have, every single data set that we look at, we disaggregate by ethnicity. Because we had to call attention to what was happening to some groups of students. It's really easy to lose sight of that when you aggregate all students, and then we start showing progress, like that graph on completion. We used to do a graph like that for course, success, persistence. I mean, just about everything was totally aggregated. And then we feel good because, you know, the needle is moving up and the lines are going up. And then we started disaggregating by ethnicity to realize that the line doesn't look the same for all groups of students. And we have a responsibility to understand for whom things are not quite working, so that then we make decisions about what to do with those students. So this is just an example of, and this is like a fairly good one. That's just from 2016. But before 2016, you look at the beginning of the graph of the blue. Those are our African-American students. And look, that was going down. That was going down for quite a while. And that was going down for every single metric that we were tracking. It was also going down for Latino students for quite a while. And then we began to put very intentional strategies in place to help the Latino students, and then all of a sudden, going up. As a matter of fact, this last year, our Latino students did better, in some cases better than the other students in every single metric. We want to cause the same kind of effect, as much as we can control that, for our African-American students. But unless we show the data, and unless we're very transparent with what's happening at the colleges, and I can disaggregate by college too, then we would never make a difference, because the highest possible level of reporting doesn't tell the full story. So this is an example of how we are presenting about our Latino students. The reason why there's such emphasis is the Latino population is the fastest growing population in the state of Arizona. If you look at students between the grades of K through 6 in public schools in Arizona, 60% of those students are Latino. Much to the disbelief of some, they're not immigrants like Maria. 90% of those students are born in the US. Then you look at K through 12, and that's approaching 50%. And they're saying by about 2050, Arizona will probably be a majority Latino state. So that's a reason why it's important, because even though it is the largest growing population, when you look at rates of participation in post-secondary education, we're doing better at getting people to attend, but we're not doing as well keeping students and helping them be successful. That will have an impact on the economy in the state. That's the argument that works, because we need them employed, engaged, paying taxes, off of receiving social services. That's not going to happen unless they have an education that allows them to compete for the jobs that are paying a decent wage. So that's the story. So we are tracking and we report, and it's not unusual that when I do presentations in the community, that I have to single out how we are making a contribution to the advancement of our Latino students. And that's why we use information like this. It may be different for some of you. I know in some parts of California, for example, they track the Asian Pacific students a little more than they track other populations. So you get to make that decision. But this is a typical slide that I would use with the community. I mean, this is not just internal information. People want to know exactly what's happening to the students in the system. And then this is an important slide. Let me, if I can go back. Oh, there we go. Okay, so we report about students all the time. And I think we've become quite comfortable disaggregating in all kinds of ways. But guess what? One of the board members said, I don't know about how many years back, what are we doing in terms of diversifying the faculty? And we're like, maybe we don't want to put that up. What are we doing to diversify the employee groups and in all levels of employee positions, not just maintenance and the people taking care of our grounds. So we decided to actually provide the data and then be held accountable to that. So that's what this is. It is how well are we doing with our residential and our adjunct faculty. And like I said, the first time even I was nervous about it. It's like we've never been that open, but we do now, and we provide that every November. So let me remind us, if I can, get this to advance. There we go, yeah. Let me share this with you, because this is my new obsession. Okay, here we go. Take a look at that, just read that. Have you seen that before, anyone? Do you know where that came from? Anybody?
An optimist.
Pardon? An optimist? That is 1950, I wasn't even born, 49, when Truman was president, and we had just come out of a war, and we had a lot of people coming back that needed to be trained in something. And remember, universities and colleges were quite selective and elitist, and Truman commissioned this report. It was the Truman Commission, actually, was called, for post-secondary. And that's a quote from that report, because that's what gave birth to community colleges as we exist today. And I believe that is as valid in 1949 as it is today. So why am I sharing that with you? Because that's the responsibility we have. And if we mean this, then when you are doing your work of collecting data and analyzing and reporting, I think we have an obligation to address that question. And we can only say, yes, we're doing that, if we are disaggregating and reporting and being honest with the information that we collect. Even if you don't present that to the public internally, you should be very aware of what's happening in your institutions. And then I'm going to use another one to make the point. Here we go. So how many of you have a statement in either your values, your mission of diversity and or equity and or inclusion? How many? Everybody. Okay, so if you do, then again, you need to use your data to make informed decisions about that. So I like this graph, and I'm going to tell you why. So take a look at that. So to the left, you have equality. To the right, you have equity. So what I'm hearing now, it used to be more conversation, even national level of diversity. Now everyone's talking about equity. Everybody has an equity agenda. Wherever I go, equity presentations, equity keynote. Well, that's what equity means. So in order to bring equity, which means not everybody's going to get the same, like we made decisions about Latino students and African American students, sometimes you need to provide to some people something more than you provide to all. The equality in community colleges comes from the quote. The equality is doors are open, everybody's welcome. The equity is going to come, this is where you are, to help you get to the same place of opportunity. Some of you are going to get more than others, and we need to be unapologetic about providing what students need, but you can only do that if you understand clearly who they are and what they need, and that's the data and the work that you do that is so important to people like me making decisions about that. And then lessons learned. No, I'm not going to tell you anything you haven't heard or know. Okay, so disaggregate the data. Now, you will be surprised. People who are not you, all the conversations I have, when people say, like a big aha is, we need to disaggregate the data. And internally, I'm like, really? You haven't done that yet? Believe it or not, you need to engage in those conversations so people understand why you need to disaggregate data. Then you need to tell the story. Now, I don't know if you noticed, almost every single slide I showed you had what? Did you notice? Maybe you didn't notice. That almost every slide had photos of people. So I made a decision a long time ago that for every chart I use, I'm going to have a photo of real people to remind people that every dot behind the chart, that everything that goes into the formulas that generate the reports that we are talking about, there's actually a human being behind that we're talking about real students, real people. So I have now collected a bunch of photos, and I like to use them just to remind it's for them that we do the work that we do. Okay, you did hear that I have a PhD in educational technology, but apparently using the clicker is not part of that program. And then obviously using the data to make decisions. Let me show you how that's impacted what we're doing at Maricopa. So this is our new strategic, my goodness. Okay, here we go. That's our new strategic plan. You don't need to read all of those words because it's not important. What is important is that we only have 2 pages for the new strategic plan. And it used to be, actually, we never had a plan because we had, every college had a plan, so we just had a lot of notebooks. And we decided, and even one of the board members said to me one day, do you all actually look at that, or do you just collect stuff and put it in a notebook and give it to the board so that we check the box that there was a plan and put it on a shelf? And I said, well, maybe. So we now have done this work. It's integrated, and it's at the very high level. We identified 3 strategic priorities, and I'm going to tell you what they are. Here's the mission over here, and then right here are the 4 board outcomes that I already told you what they are. So that's exactly what is in the middle. So let me tell you what's new. So here's one of the areas, and it doesn't matter which one is up. I think that it just changed. Okay, it doesn't matter. But I'll tell you what's new. What's new is that the board said we are not pleased anymore with board outcome statements and metrics. We want to see goals, we want to see objectives. So we provided that. And then we got really specific. And then we came to them and they said, we don't see any targets. That's language coming from the governing board member. We've been shy about that. We don't like targets. We don't like to say we're going to increase by 10 or 5 or 2 or whatever %. And they said, go back. Now you tell us what a target is that's acceptable. We want to see targets. And Chancellor, you're going to get evaluated against those targets. So you better be evaluating the college presidents, and then it goes down that way. But that is the expectation today. I didn't even know that my board members could actually have a conversation with me about specific targets, but they do, and they mean it, and they expect that. So we had to rely on Carrie in my place and people like you to say, help me help them understand what's a reasonable target. Because remember, they think like increase by 50%, or 250% is what works. Well, we know that that's not right. So their job was to come back and say, if you want to be here by 2020, here's what you need to do. So it may be 2%, it may be 5%, because it has to be feasible, realistic, so we can accomplish it. But those numbers don't resonate easily with people. When you say 2%, that feels like you're not making an effort. So your job is to help people like me understand why that is a reasonable goal, what that translates to, so that it can be communicated and defended and provided with a good rationale. But this is the new way. That's what the governing board is expecting. We're very public about it. This plan we shared with community members, we shared with students, we did a lot of, it was a draft for quite a while. Now it isn't because it was adopted. But I wanted to, this is another one, and then for the first time, if you were to read carefully, which you can't now, is we have statements of increasing not only the diversity of students, but increasing the diversity of employees, including faculty and staff. And that's the first time that we have a very explicit goal and target, because we were asked to do that. They said, looking at the data every November and saying, oh, we're not doing that well yet, they said, enough. Tell us how you're going to get it done, and let's make it very, very clear. And all of these elements are part of my evaluation coming up in a few weeks. So I'm going to assume this is not unique to the Maricopa system, that this is probably happening in your institutions. So the work you do is critical to the institution, because you are the people that are able, you help us tell the story. You help us tell the story. You help us do things like this plan that is realistic and achievable, because it's very easy to get caught up in that. It should be by 25%. Why? We should, if they can do it, we can do it. Well, if you translate that to actual numbers of people in a large system like ours, that's not easy. We're not going to do that in a year. Maybe 5 years, but not in a year. So if in 5 years we want to increase by 25%, then what happens every year to advance in that direction? So that's the work that you do, and that's how you help all of us tell the story. And at the end of the day, why we do all of this? We do all of this because of the students, because they come with hopes. They come with all kinds of challenges, we have students, like you probably have students today, who are coming to us hungry. We have homeless students, we have single mothers, we have people working 3 jobs. And all this work that we do is to help them get a better life. So what you do matters greatly. What I do matters too, but we do it for them. That's the whole point. So I hope there was something today that was of either new or provocative or a review or a reminder of the importance of the value of the work that you do for them, for the students, for the community. So thank you very much. Do we have time for questions?
Thank you. I think we've got a few minutes for questions.
Hi, my name is Peter Carlson. I'm from Delta College in Michigan. A question that I have for you is, you asked the question specifically, and you referred to your son John in terms of taking his class. And at the beginning, when they first enroll, they declare why they're taking the classes. Is that question ever asked again? Because it's a 6-year period, and the students, if they originally want to transfer and then maybe during that time period decide instead they're going to do something in a workforce.
Correct.
And the reason I'm asking is, as you were talking about that, I was thinking this semester alone in my statistics class that I taught, there were 3 or 4 students at the beginning of the semester were thinking of transferring. By the end of the semester, we're looking at more of a workforce program. And so is that question ever asked, and how do you handle that?
Well, not as often as we should. It is exactly what you just said. It needs to be asked more than once. But so we ask once a year, not enough. But let me tell you why that's going to change. And I don't know that I keep looking at Kerry because I hope he's taking notes, and then he goes back to say, this is what she said we need to do, because we are now going to move to the adoption of guided pathways. And many of you are doing work, almost everybody. So in order to do that, we're going to have a very clear understanding of how to advise students in the right manner for the right reasons. And that's not going to happen if we only ask the question once when you enroll. So we're going to have to change. The input is fine because we make all kinds of decisions on that, but we're going to have other checkpoints where we have clarity on what is it that the students want. Now, quite frankly, we also know what happens is you need to choose something, because many times if you're not in a declared area, you can't even get your financial aid. So we know that if you're forcing the students to choose something, they're probably going to choose either the truth or something that sounds close enough. So we need to find other ways that are not just asking through the technology to understand what is the real intent and then how are we making progress. But that's going to be critical questions if we really want to implement the guided pathways in the way that they should be to make them effective for the students. So, great question, thank you. Anything else? Yes.
Is your board elected, and how often do they meet?
Yes, they are elected to 4-year terms. There are 7 board members, and they meet quite often. They meet the 4th Tuesday of the month is our regular meeting, and that can go 2, 3, 4 hours. But they've also started meeting the 2nd Tuesday of the month when we have what we call agenda review. And they also moved to having committees, board committees, which we didn't have before. So the board committees, which is supposed to be 2 or 3 of them, so there's no quorum, but because all of them come, is now all of the committees are committees of the whole, and those are budget and finance, and there is a policy committee, and those also meet once a month. So when you add all the multiple meetings, it's like 3 meetings almost every 2nd Tuesday. And then we have special meetings. So when we have for example, the monitoring report, which happens in November, that's a separate meeting because we take the whole time to do that. This last year, they decided that we're rushing it. So we used to do it for an hour, we're rushing it. Then we did 2 hours, it's too rushed. Then we did 3 hours, too rushed. So this last year, we did it on a Saturday, and all about data. And we were there from 8 in the morning until maybe 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Not too long ago, we had a meeting on guided pathways, for example, and we decided they need to understand when we say guided pathways, what are we talking about, how is that going to matter, and so on. So meetings all the time. Anything else? Yes.
How has the shift to policy governance gone?
Well, it depends on who's on the board. So we have some people that are very loyal to the original concept of policy governance, and they follow the Carver model as if, that's the Bible of the college. Others have difficulty understanding some of the terminology that comes with that. All of them embrace, for the most part, shared governance, for example. Some of them are less comfortable with what's known in policy governance as the chancellor's limitations, and those are like the statements of what the chancellor shouldn't do to place the institution at risk. Some of them have a hard time understanding why would you make it in the negative? Why isn't there a set of guidelines that are positive for the chancellor? So I think we went through many years where the board had a lot of stability, and those people were really into the policy governance. I would say today we have new members and people questioning, is that the best way for the board to move forward? Even though some of the elements of that, like shared governance, is part of the fabric of the institution. I don't see that changing, but they may want to change some other aspects of how policy is developed. But we adopted policy governance right from the very, very beginning, and then a lot of years that we followed that model. But right now, as we speak, as a matter of fact, yesterday I was on the phone with one of the board members saying, some of us are wanting to move in a different direction, and that's what boards do. As long as they have the votes, they get to make that decision. Anything else? Oh, sorry.
Cohorts, are those program cohorts, program students, or what? How did you get those cohorts?
The cohorts?
Yeah.
So we track for the monitoring report for the board. We look at everybody for specific purposes of that. We do first time in college. Help me out here, Carrie. What's the definition of the cohort? It's first time?
New to higher education.
Oh, new to higher ed, intent.
And then it depends on the metrics. Some of them are intent to transfer or intent to receive a degree. So either new to higher ed or new to higher ed, intent to transfer, intent to get a degree. Those are our major cohorts.
So we had to define a cohort because we couldn't measure everybody, because if you just come to take, for example, a yoga class, we didn't want to include that person in persistence. I mean, fine if you come back and take yoga every semester, but that's not something that we necessarily need to track. So we had to agree, and that took forever on a cohort. But we also do other things. We had to submit data to IPED, so we do. We are part of this. We also have, it's not quite the VFA, but VFA-like, that the state of Arizona adopted. So we also track in that manner, because then we report to the state. And then we have the questions that we get from the governing board. So they're the people that get to, recalculate things on a needs basis, because, when someone wants a question answered, it's really hard to say, well, sorry, that doesn't fit the cohort. That's not a response that they like to hear. So it's a lot of work, because we have multiple definitions. We want to be, how many of you are VFA, Voluntary Framework of Accountability? So we wanted initially to do that, and then we moved in a direction, VFA moved in a different direction. Now I understand VFA is in a different place, so just this week, I'm telling them we need to look at that, because maybe, but being part of the VFA, then it benefits us, because it, just as the NCCBP is national data, that as much as the colleges and people at the colleges don't want to be compared, the board members want to look at comparisons. So we always need to have an ability to say, we're doing equal, better, not as well as peer institutions. Like it or not, that is a question that we get. And so the more sources we have of fidelity of that data, then the better. But for many of the graphs that I shared is that cohort as defined by Carrie. So any questions you have moving forward about technical stuff, Kerry Mitchell here, who is in our institutional research department, will be, I'm sure, glad to respond to the questions. But let me say thank you for your attention. Thank you for what you do at community colleges, and thank you for being here supporting Lou and the NCCVP.
And thank you very much for that wonderful
you.
presentation. We really appreciate that you came all the way from Arizona to talk to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lou. Yeah, my pleasure.